We're now going to move on to an explanation of IK handles, but before we do, I wanted to point out something. Right now, the skeleton can be seen through the mesh. This happens throughout the process. As you go to like weight painting, that'll bring it out, and as well as a few other things. If you're trying to look at the mesh and how it's being deformed, like you're doing an animation, you want to see just the mesh, you can come up here to this, like the view menu right here, to the buttons here. And there's this one here that is turn on and off X-ray joints. So if you click on it, that'll make it go away so that it's not showing through. If you need to be able to see through again though, then you can turn it back on. So I'll just step back again, but you get the idea. So to create an IK handle, you need to first have a joint chain. So if I hold down the X key for snap to grid, and I create this joint chain, I can select this IK handle, click one side, and then another. And what this allows me to do is have something that controls the movement of multiple joints at the same time, which can be very useful if you're needing to animate something like an arm, rather than the alternative. So I'll create another joint chain really quickly, of trying to figure out that position, each joint at a time. Instead, it's much faster. Just go, okay, I want the wrist over here, I want the wrist over here, I want the wrist over here, rather than trying to guess, well, I want it kind of here, no, more in and a little bit tight, no, a little further out. And you get the idea. So IK handles make animation much, much simpler. Now, along with this, there are a couple of issues that are going to arise. So let me step back before all this. One, if you're just dropping in the IK handle, at certain times you're going to have troubles with it. So I want to point that out before it happens so that you have the information for how to fix it. With the joints, I am doing a rotate plane solver. There are actually different types of joints that can be created. So if I come up here to create IK handle, I select that option box. That's also the tool settings. So I can also do it just by coming here with it created. You can choose between a single chain solver or a rotate plane solver. For now, just worry about rotate plane solvers. I'll hide that. But what happens with a rotate plane solver is it gives me a specific rotation, like what's the default direction for the central joint to come out as this comes together. And so you see it's going along that arrow. And we need to be able to control that based on what's happening. So in order to get it to move correctly, we need to make sure that somehow this is offset. Otherwise it gives us a random direction. So I will delete that IK handle. A way I can approach this is simply to push this back a little bit, bring this joint forward, and then create the IK handle by selecting the first joint and then the third joint, which works, but if you notice, it didn't stay straight. Instead, it rotated it or flipped it over. So this is what can happen sometimes. If you've taken the time to actually offset the central joint, which you need to, so if you're rigging an arm or something, you want to slightly offset that central joint so that it knows which direction the rotate plane is going to go in. Sometimes it will flip over or in some other way freak out. The way to resolve this so you don't always have an upside down arm is to use a locator. So by coming up to rigging, locator there to create it, I'm going to bring that here and drop it back in space to where I think that should be pointing. Right now it's pointing forward because it flipped that over, but I want it to actually point backwards. So in order to do that, I'm going to constrain the pull vector. Oh, by the way, another place to find a locator is create locator. So two options. So to constrain the pull vector, I select the locator first and then shift select the IK handle. I then can come up to constrain pull vector. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to have control of the direction that central plane is going. Actually, let me make sure I only have the IK handle selected. So, for example, if I want to move the arm out here, I can grab this, cause that to go up and down. You see that it now follows that point, so I don't run the risk of moving the arm in and potentially having the elbow bend the wrong direction. So this is a way of controlling that direction, which is another reason we use the RP solvers, or the rotate plane solvers. There's another way to use IK handles, and that's for a single joint. Yet again, it's just for ease of use for trying to move something very quickly rather than grabbing a joint and rotating it. Instead, just having a handle that you can place in a specific area to cause the movement. In order to do that, I'm going to create a new joint. I'll just add that in right here. I will parent that joint. And then what I can do is I will grab the IK handle again and simply go between this joint and this joint. In this way, it's much easier for me to just grab a joint and move that around to where it needs to be, as opposed to trying to animate it. So before I created that, by grabbing this rotate spot and trying to get that lined up at the right angle, once again, I can just use an IK handle, but across a single joint section to be able to move that a little easier. So in these ways, you can have different IK handles that help support your animation and make life a lot easier for you. So a final quick note for this module before we end it. I want to talk very quickly once again about cleanup. Cleanup is very, very important within this process. Once again, if you just go in and delete history, that will now cause problems. So if you're going to create a rig and an animation for something, you want to make sure that the mesh itself is clean before you start this process. And I'll show you what I mean by that. If I come through and I start moving things around, and even if I set up an animation, so S, over here, I'll move that over, hit S again, move it back, hit S again, so I've got this animation going. It's a little bit slow of an animation, but you get the idea. That's great. But then I can come in, I go Edit, Delete All by Type, History, and now if I play that animation, or the animation, make it so it's visible, you see that it is not influencing the mesh at all. So if I grab this and move this off to the side, there is no more influence, and so you would need to repaint and get everything reattached in order to do something. Now, using this can be useful. For example, if you have a character or something that you just need to pose and they're rigged, yeah, you can pose it and then delete the rig and put them in a position, and so you can create a lot of statues and figurines based off of a base model, but using a regular character in a T-pose before you rig and then move them in a position. And then that's a good way to just act as a deformer for your final mesh or final product. You can do the same thing with a pipe. So for example, creating a long wire pipe, rigging it very quickly, and then moving the joints to create the deformations that make it look like it's like running along a ceiling and then hanging down across a wall. And then once again, deleting the joints, then suddenly you've got a wire in place. So that's a way to use this. But if you're planning on using this for something that needs to stay rigged and animated, once again, make sure to not delete the history after the fact. If you do need to delete any history from cleanup, delete only the non-deformer history. Otherwise, you can potentially separate the rig from the mesh. Anyways, that's it for this module. In the next module, we will come back and look at how to apply this with a bipedal rig. For now, what I'd encourage you to do is, rather than just jump onto the next portion, take some time to play around with the tools that have been covered. Start building joints, binding them to meshes, throwing in IK handles. The more you play, once again, the better off you're going to be. The more you're going to be able to learn quickly, the less scared of the tools you're going to be. So just have fun with it, play around, and use what you've picked up so far. That's it. Bye.